Yes, it's Paul Position. Goes around the outside, it's in his teammate.
Qualified.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Barely Qualified, a Formula One podcast. We were on a little bit of a hiatus. Both Brandon and I picked the most inopportune time in the middle of a triple header to take little mini vacations. Last week, I was in San Luis Potosí, Mexico, just after the Spanish Grand Prix, so didn't have time to record there. This weekend, you were in sunny Palm Springs, possibly the hottest place in the world. So how are you feeling coming off of that?
Definitely a little dried out. It was very hot there, 107. Definitely not as hot as the action that we saw on track here in Austria. So
Beautiful.
just super excited to get into all of that we been blessed with now in this season.
Yeah, so we're gonna try and get through this as quick as we can. We missed the Spanish Grand Prix, so let's start there before we get to Austria, which is really honestly the highlight of what will probably be, all three races. Because I don't know if I hope Silverstone can top that, but Austria is going to be the real hot topic here. So in the Spanish Grand Prix, it was Max Verstappen from Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton. Mercedes showing some real pace. They've really added themselves back into the fold here, and I would say not quite close, but still title fight on. There's still a pretty good gap in the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship, but McLaren has totally entered themselves into the chat. And I've said that before, but now they've really, really solidified it. Outside of a few, mishaps maybe, or some timing issues, they could have easily won both of these races. So, starting in Barcelona, not a whole lot going on. Mercedes does have a good showing with Hamilton and Russell finishing third and fourth, but the real story was Lando Norris missing out on his second victory in the past few races with just 2.19 seconds behind Max. I mean, you're literally talking about just as close to a sprint to the finish line as we can get. Lando Norris really just making himself right there on Max's fucking rear wing.
Yeah, unfortunately for Lando, this one was lost on lap one. He was able to top the field in qualifying. Kind of a rare thing that Max is not on top in qualifying, but this is kind of where the Red Bulls are at now. Like they're kind of not always going to be the fastest car. That's is going to be a little bit more circuit dependent on, and McLaren's had it in the bag in Barcelona. Unfortunately, Lando wasn't able to fully capitalize on it. He was overtaken early on by George Russell, who had studied the Fernando Alonso 2012 Barcelona start, and basically he said he just practiced it the night before and was able to perfectly execute it, starting from fourth on the grid, goes up to first, and is able to lead for I think about a lap and a half or so before getting overtaken by Max, where Max is then able to build a little gap that he's able to withstand and hold out for the rest of the race, not allowing Lando to catch him at the very end.
Yeah, I mean, that was a beautiful start from George Russell. Always credit where credit is due, no matter the fact that we are the president and the co-CEO of the George Russell Hater Fan Club. He's been putting on great performances lately, and that Mercedes car is finally getting dialed in. And not just for George, but for Lewis as well. They look great. But like you said, yeah, ultimately, they didn't have the overall race pace to keep up with the two protagonists of the championship fight. And man, you just got to think, it's just another dagger for Lando Norris. Because as time went on in that race, he was cutting down the lead, cutting into Max's time, but just again about another lap short. So while McLaren climbing up and putting themselves in that window, there's that one little thing that's off with the team, because I think some tire strategy could have done them a little bit better. Lando went a little longer on a stint or so than maybe he should have. That, and then we have to point out the glaring issue, and that is Lando Norris' starts off the line.
Yeah, I mean that's the real trend here. That's I think it's maybe not even necessarily him, but it could be a McLaren thing. I have to maybe look into that a little bit further, comparing him and Oscar. But it does seem like Lando is having a bit of a problem with that lately. So he was definitely compromised by that, and had he had a couple more laps to catch up to Max, maybe he could have done it. Max could have also been managing, so it's hard to say, but definitely missed an opportunity there at the beginning. So you know,
Yeah, I
leaving a little bit on the table, but it's showing that the fight is there.
absolutely. And like, I think we can sit here and we can, as much as I love him, we can nitpick at the shortcomings of Lando Norris and McLaren. But we also have to remember that Max Verstappen is still Max Verstappen. So he's still putting
100%.
in amazing defensive drives. One of them this weekend was a little bit off kilter, maybe not necessarily dirty, but not necessarily
Yeah.
clean. But I mean, in Barcelona, he still was able to keep Lando Norris in what I think was the faster car behind him for the majority of the race, and then ultimately at the end where it really matters.
Yeah. But I think the big thing from Spain was that this is just the fact that we got to see that fight again for the for the win of the race was very promising, and showed us that this is going to be a more common thing throughout the rest of the season, and really set us up for leading into Austria. So
Yeah, these whole past few races is really giving off, like you said earlier, 2021 vibes. Like it feels like Lando Max is kind of Max versus Lewis. And now you're starting to see the elbows come out in the exact same way that we saw. So I'm excited, even though, McLaren and Lando Norris haven't come out on top in these two last races. It's still super fucking exciting. Before we get to what people really want to hear about, do you want to go over anything else from the Spanish Grand Prix?
So we saw a bit of sparks flying between the Ferrari drivers.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot of reasons as to what that could be. I mean, obviously Ferrari struggling a little bit now after some upgrades that they put on. I think it was what was it, after Monaco, around then? Yeah, so maybe right before Canada, some upgrades they put on the car introduced a little bit more bouncing. So they've been struggling a bit there. Haven't been able to put any quite the same amount of results I've seen. And then Charles, hitting a little bit of bad luck as well.
They're not the only two teammates that have been going at it. The two Haas's have been going at it a little bit. We saw that a little bit more in Austria this weekend with Kevin Magnussen getting on the radio and complaining about having to give up position to Nico. And then the two Alpines are giving us an absolute fucking soap opera. They're not even pretending to like each other anymore. They're just literally, I mean, Pierre Gasly gets around Esteban Ocon and says ciao as he makes the overtake. So a lot of team drama going on, and Ferrari is going to be the glaring one because we expect them to be fighting for the top spot, and they're at this point barely fighting for 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th.
Yeah, it's such a weird situation over there for Ferrari. You got Carlos leaving on the way out, so he's over there trying to prove a point. You got Charles, just constantly struggling to get it together. He's just kind of been tumbling backwards since earlier in the year when we were at one point earlier in the year we were talking about could he fight Max for the championship, and it's just been like one thing after another, series of DNFs or strategy problems. He was coming out, I think in Barcelona he was coming out of the pit and he had his car went into anti-stall, right? And so he ended up getting real bad, coming out in a real bad spot from the pit. And so just, a series of events that just seem to be making his life increasingly more difficult. And then, when you're there, scrapping with your teammate that's trying to prove a point, it just doesn't make it any easier. So
yeah, he's not giving him any sort of a break when it comes to that.
So vibes are just a little bit off, is I think what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and it's kind of shitty for Chuck because he's coming off the biggest win of his entire career in Monaco, and then a little bit of a lackluster performance in Canada. We go to Barcelona, anti-stall kicks in, come into Austria, and he just seems to be fucking nowhere. There was one point where he was running in the middle of the race in 18th after having to pit early because he touched with, I think it was Oscar Piastri, but.
Yeah, that damage early on, like first lap, just basically ruined it for him. So.
Yeah, Outside of that, anything in Barcelona that we really need to go over, other than the real title fight happening between Max Verstappen? I guess we can mention that this is sort of the start of what seems to be like Williams falling back into their natural position, which is the back of the pack.
Yeah, unfortunate to see, but it's just like Alex Albon said, it was just a little bit of reality check for everybody. They weren't able to hide behind some maybe weird track conditions or weird track characteristics. Like being in Barcelona, it's a true test for the cars with the all the different varying types of corners and everything. So they just really they got caught out. They're still a ways back, and that's most evident there. And then also it should be noted the Cash App RB
I was going to bring that up.
Put on some upgrades there that obviously didn't work, and they've bounced back down to the back of the field. So
they were looking really good. Coming into this triple header and coming out of it, they look so much worse for the wear without having any on track issues other than mechanical, like no collisions, no touch, none of that. Just looking lost pretty much. So hopefully maybe
just lack of pace.
Yeah, they just need to go back to what they had before. Take off all those upgrades, go back, restart, go back to the drawing board. The two Alpines, despite going head-to-head, wheel-to-wheel with each other, they look like they've picked up pace a little bit, which kind of makes their fight even more exciting because it gives them a reason to want to work together but can't. Imagine if they were able to actually do some teamwork together and pull off some sandwich moves, which they almost did. It looked like this weekend in Austria, which I keep saying we're going to hold off on talking about, but I can't. It looked like they sandwiched Fernando Alonso and pulled, a little bit of shake and bake, and both of them get around Fernando Alonso, but then end up going wheel to wheel and pushing each other off the track immediately after. I'm talking about within one or two turns.
Yeah, I think just the fact that it's already set in stone that Esteban's out and all that, it's just the idea that they can play nicely is completely. I think that's all out the window. I think they're going to be just fighting each other for ego's sake for the rest of the year, and we're just going to be sitting here and enjoying it. So good on them,
dude. I love it.
Keeping it close. That's what we love to see. So
I love it. The fact that they're in a competitive car now, or a semi-competitive car, and willing to just flip each other off at every turn. That's fucking great. And then with the emergence of this car actually putting in decent times, it gives Carlos Sainz a potential opportunity to sign somewhere where he's not going to just flounder for a year before signing a big deal. So that's great too. Other than that, do you want to just get into Austria and all the dramatics of that?
Let's do it.
All right, take it away. I'm going to let you start this off.
Yeah, well, where do we start?
It's a sprint weekend.
Sprint race. Let's see. I got to pull up these results. Sprint race definitely gave us a little bit of a glimpse of what was going to happen on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. The sprint was Verstappen from Piastri and Lando Norris. So a good sprint race for the McLarens, and really, really, really showing that Red Bull is now in a one-car fight, because even in a sprint weekend, Sergio Perez can't show up, can't qualify, can't put any sort of competitive effort, and he gains 1 point in the sprint race when the McLarens are right there.
Yeah, sprint qualifying, Sergio's only able to get it up into 7th. In the actual sprint, he ends up losing a place. Qualifying again on Sunday for Checo in 8th place. I know we've been talking about this. The Red Bull cars a little bit, has been caught up to a little bit by McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes now. How much can we, how much of this gap is Sergio not hitting his marks, and how much of this do we feel like is just everyone else catching up? Because I feel like it's definitely
like how much damage
a little bit towards Checo needs to get things a little bit together.
Right. Like the question I think is how much damage control is Max doing compared to where is Checo not living up to the potential of the car? And maybe we need to do another test with one Yuki Tsunoda or a Daniel Ricciardo in that car to see exactly where that thing is at. I don't know. Liam Lawson is technically their test driver, right?
Yeah,
For
and
all of
there's
Red Bull Racing.
yeah, and then now that Ricardo's been under pressure, there's been word that Liam was going to get into his seat. So who knows what's really going on over there? I know that they've been known to switch things at any time whenever they feel
Mm-hmm.
is necessary. So anything is possible. If Checo can't get it together, can we see maybe one of those RB drivers getting the bump? If it's going to be anybody, I feel like it would be Yuki.
Yeah,
I
I
don't think
mean,
they're going to go straight to throwing someone like Liam in that car. Or
my
I don't know.
question was going to be, I'm curious if if Liam Lawson, I'm guessing that he is the reserve driver. I don't remember off the top of my head. What are his times in the sim compared to Checo and Max? Because if he's on par with Checo, then you can just go, okay, then Max is out driving the car, as Max should be and is known to do. And the car is really, maybe a step behind the McLarens and the Mercedes, but Max is just doing Max stuff to keep them in front. Because outside of the rumblings of Liam Lawson future or taking over Checo's spot or Daniel Ricciardo's spot, in the future, there's no talk right now going on of Checo losing his spot. They just signed him to a 2-year deal, so they might know exactly where their car is at and just where their head driver is taking that car and what he's doing with that car. Because even amidst the rumblings of Max to Mercedes in a few years, Christian Horner went out and promised that Max Verstappen will not be moving teams. And so that might just be him saying, look, we're going to do whatever we can to keep this guy here because we're in a place that ain't as good as it has been in the past.
Yeah, and Checo manages to sell a bunch of jerseys and merch. So
there's that too. He brings in that Telcel sponsorship money. So Max ends up edging out both McLarens, but the McLarens, I think, coming out of that sprint race, said something that it did give them a good idea of what to expect going into the qualifying and then also the race on Sunday. And I think they both did show that they had a better idea of things. Lando, of course, doesn't get the greatest start in the race. Max does take pole in qualifying. Lando is just barely slower. I was kind of hoping that he might be able to get an inside line and overtake off the start, but he didn't. And then it looked like for the majority of that race, it was going to be pretty boring. Chuck Leclerc does end up having a little bit of contact with Oscar Piastri. Chuck comes out on the worst side of it, has to pit, ruins his race. Oscar is fine. He actually stays right up there at the top of the pack, ends up podium in the end. But for the most part, it was Max kind of just running away from Lando until a wary pit stop and an untimely safety car really, really shifted things, which is the entire story of this race and has kind of set the F1 world on fire.
Yeah, I mean, this has kind of been building for a while, right? Like we saw glimpses of this in Imola. We saw this kind of starting to come together in Barcelona, but in the race, in the little second stint there, we saw Lando talking with his engineers. They mentioned over the radio saying, Max has only got one set of mediums left, so we're going to try to reserve these tires. We got an extra set, and when we see that final pit stop come and Max goes to the medium tire, he had, I think, 7-second gap. When he switched to that used medium, that slow stop closes a little bit of that gap, putting Lando right in a position to be able to capitalize on having a fresher medium tire.
Yeah, I mean, not only was the stop slow, but they had to wait for Lando's car to go past them in the pit, slowing them down even more so that they can get ahead of him and then come out. And Lando ends up coming out just behind him. I think it was something less than 2 seconds coming out of pit lane. So really, really slowed that pit stop down. And then Lando on the brand new tires, Max on the used tires, meant that Lando was eventually going to catch them. And they kind of had a DRS battle for the better part of about 5 laps there.
Huge battle. And, like I said, this is kind of been building for a while. We see that that Lando has the speed to catch Max, but we didn't really see what was going to happen when they go wheel to wheel. So this is the first time we've been able to see in their Formula One careers, see these guys actually go toe to toe and it was really cool to see Lando try different things. He tried different moves in different areas, tried to feel out like what Max is gonna do, and we saw Max do some questionable
Yeah, we
things.
saw Max do some
uh,
Max type things, which is always
yeah.
questionable. Lando's first move that he goes to make, Lando makes the move, and then Max reacts to that, which is under FIA regulation illegal. Right? He has to make the defensive move before the offensive move gets made. Otherwise, it's considered dangerous. And Lando makes the move. Max goes to defend it right after. They argue on radio that he should get a penalty, which I believe he does end up getting because he got a 10-second penalty, right? I don't know if it came from...
Max?
Yeah, Max got a 10-second penalty. I don't know if it came from the contact or if it came from that initial move. I think it was that initial move. But Lando goes to make it. He doesn't get it. On the next lap, he goes, sends it up the inside. He locks up a little bit. He takes the position, goes off track, overtakes, and then has to give the place back immediately, which,
It does, yeah.
he does it in a very gentlemanly fashion. Maybe he could use a little bit of that dog that Max has in him and wait until a more opportune time to give the position back. Like Max would usually wait until a DRS zone to give the position back and then just take it right back. Lando hasn't quite been in this position himself yet, so I think that's just a little bit of greenery in Lando's mind. But so he gives it back right away. They go back at it for another few laps. They go into the same exact turn. Lando's hanging it around the inside. He holds his line. He holds the line. He's got all four wheels on track. Nothing even in the runoff. Nothing on the curb, in the red. None of that. And Max starts edging over. He pushes Lando off the track. Or presumably would push him off the track, but Lando holds his position. They touch. Lando's front wing gets chewed up. Max's left rear tire comes completely off. He makes it back to the pit on 3, and the undercarriage and front wing of Lando's car is just completely mangled, and he has to DNF, whereas Max gets to finish the race on that new tire, takes the 10-second penalty, and finishes, I believe, 5th in the race. So, big question is, A, should Max have been made aware of the 10-second penalty before going into that battle with Lando? And whose fault? So a little bit of a jumbled up question there. Actually, first off, let's go into whose fault was that collision?
It was Max's, and that's why he got a penalty.
Because there's a lot of Max defenders out there. There's a lot of Lando defenders out there. And there's a lot of people bringing up old footage of Max and Chuck going into the same corner years ago. And Max, not making contact or holding his line, but not making contact with Charles, who had the inside line in that instance, and a reversed instance with Max and Lando. But to me, it's clear that Lando holds his position just slightly farther over on the track than Max was when he made contact with Chuck. And it's Max who veers off to the left to make contact with Lando, not giving him enough space, which you have to do. So in my opinion, this is all Max. And if that collision doesn't happen, Lando's winning that fucking race. There's no doubt in my mind Lando's winning that race.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was like one of the arguments that he was trying to make after the race. He was like, I'm just trying to defend, basically. And he's like, at a certain point, I would have had to just like let him pass me. And it's like, and I'm not going to just let him pass me. Like, I'm there to win regardless. And and Max doesn't care if he finishes 5th instead, right? Instead of 2nd or whatever, because
No.
he only wants to win, and he's willing to ruin his race because of it, and ruin someone else's race because of it, right?
It is more beneficial to take Lando out of the race and suffer the consequences of falling back a few places. Not that he knows that he's gonna only fall back 4 and Lando completely DNF going into it, but it is more beneficial to just take them both out and take whatever penalty points come from it than to let Lando win. Even though it's only a 7, let's say they finish 1st and 2nd, it's only a 7-point gap. But Lando walks out of this with 0 because of this. And I don't think that's Max's I don't think that's his mentality going into it. Like, some Schumacher ass, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to take us both out before you win type of a move. But I think he is ruthless enough to just make a move that could result in that. I don't think he's trying to do that, but Max is a dog. He'll go elbows out wherever he can and try and back you off. And in this instance, Lando just didn't back off. And that's his right.
And so I have a question for you. Because to me, like, it seemed like, that's like, it's like we're seeing Max being pushed to the edge, right? So
Mhm.
it seems like he gets a little bit more like reckless when he is on the edge. He's getting pushed. He doesn't, I don't like, is this, if Lando is consistently doing this, like, are we going to see Max make mistakes and Max actually start to falter if Lando keeps pressure on like this? Like, how, remember 2021, it was him and Lewis having bouts like this on a number of occasions, and back then the rules were a little more lax. They've been changed a bunch of rules since then. So as long as race control is like, I don't know if they're gonna if race control lets them just do whatever. I think he might be okay, but as long as they're not like actually taking each other out of the race. But I think like if he's becomes more reckless and he's facing more and more pressure, he could end up like actually like hurting himself by being more like too aggressive and getting all these penalties, and maybe he needs to take another approach and just say, hey, I need to.
Maybe. I mean,
I don't know.
I heard some questions of, are we starting to see Max slip a little bit because he hasn't had an actual contender for the last 2 years? He sort of just ran away with the championship easily in the best car, at the snap of his finger without a real challenge. And now that he's got a challenger, has he kind of forgotten how to battle? Has he forgotten how to go wheel to wheel consistently? And I would say the answer there is probably no. This is still Max Verstappen we're talking about, but we're just getting reminded of what happens when you do go wheel to wheel with Max Verstappen. I mean, think of, what was it? Was it Imola or Monza 2021 when him and Lewis went into the dirt? They went into the gravel together, and Max ended up on top of Lewis's head. That's what this reminded me of. It had the exact same vibe.
Hmm. Yeah, and but this time it's like his quote unquote boy is his friend.
Yeah,
You know
one
what
of
I
his
mean?
best
So
friends.
it's like, how do you think that is going to change things this time around? Like, does that even going to matter? Like, is the friendship like just set aside? For the remainder of the season, like, how do they navigate that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the dinners are probably going to be a little bit more awkward, but I think it's going to matter a lot less to Max Verstappen where the friendship goes than it's going to matter to Lando because, one, Max has already been there. Two, Lando's never been there. And I think Max is more of a psychopath and doesn't care as much about friendship as somebody like Lando Norris does. But Lando Norris, I think, is going to grit his teeth and go, okay, well, we have our on-track, life, and then we have our off-track life. And they're going to have to separate those two. But, talking about that, did you watch any of the post-race interviews with those two guys?
I just saw a little bit of like what Max said. I didn't see any of Lando. I saw like one quote about something. He said something to the effect of like, if Max doesn't like take any responsibility, I will lose respect for him.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it's just racing,
Yeah, so
right?
those two interviews happened. They were both basically kind of flaming each other. Like, it's his fault.
Yeah.
He needs to apologize. He needs to take accountability. And they're both pointing their finger metaphorically at each other. And somebody took a photo from behind the interview box. And while these two interviews are going on, they're standing no more than 2 feet apart. They're right next to each other,
Back
talking to different
back to back.
reporters. Not back to back, side to side. So, I
Oh,
mean,
that's
if
so
you
funny.
haven't seen those two interviews, go and watch them and then look up the photo of how close they were. This battle's about to get fucking heated, and I think Silverstone... You know what I mentioned? I mentioned that I don't think Silverstone will be able to beat Austria in terms of drama. But with that interview and everything that's going to come out in this next week and the contention that we're going to feel, Silverstone's going to be a banger.
I just can't wait.
Especially a home race for Lando Norris after Max just, did what he did at his home race. Wowza. Holy shit. I mean, Ooh, I got goosebumps just thinking about it. But so that was kind of like the main drama, and now we have to kind of it felt a little bit lackluster, everything that happened after that, but we do have to congratulate Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, and George Russell for picking up the scraps and completing their race and doing it in great fashion. George had a good weekend altogether. He even said, going into this race, he said, "I'm going to let those two do what they do up at the front. I'm going to let them duke it out. And if they take each other out, I'm going to be there to pick up the scraps." And it came true. This is the weekend of George Russell. He practices Fernando Alonso overtake. He gets it done. He points out in the outfield like Babe Ruth and says, this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to be there to fill in that spot, and he did it. And then Oscar Piastri was, just a few seconds off of that. I think a few more laps, and Oscar would have been able to win that first race himself.
I mean, had Oscar not got that penalty, the track limits penalty in qualifying, I mean, he would have started the race from third.
He probably would have
been in an amazing position to take that lead. So,
yeah, I mean, you got to think
could have been
too,
Oscars. So
if the majority of that race wasn't as mundane as it was, then Oscar might have been pushing the limits of that car a little bit and gaining a little bit more of a track advantage, other than driving like a safer race and trying to just take 5th place or 4th place, I guess it would have been, and trying to get himself more closer to the rear of George Russell's car, knowing that there could be a potential fight for the victory at the end. But didn't happen. That's the way it goes.
Yeah. You want to do our props and flops from Austria?
Should we do some props and flops for Barcelona before we do that?
I mean, I have to
just throw them out there.
I have to think about it for a second. Hold on.
I'll start with mine. My first flop is going to go to. I got to go with Aston Martin as a whole. This is Fernando Alonso's home race, and they had been looking decent in the few races prior. But that to me was like the first showing that they're really, really falling off a cliff. They weren't looking great, but decent. And I felt like Barcelona was just like a real dagger to the fact that they don't have anything to do in this season.
Yeah, I think my biggest flop goes to it's got to be Cash App Red Bull, just for falling so far back. Let's see, Yuki 19th in Spain, Ricardo 9th in Austria, but which I can't really give him too much credit for that. We saw 2 people from the top 10 go out of the race. So what, so forth. So and he's been so up and down this year. I just feel like I don't know. I think sort of these, they shouldn't be putting on upgrades and going backwards. They had a good momentum going, putting them on the cusp of points every weekend, and it just hasn't really worked out for them.
Yeah. And my props for Barcelona, I'm going to give it to Mercedes, the team as a whole, because that's when I feel like they really showed up to the championship, and they finished third and fourth, besting the Ferraris, and really, I think, solidified their place in the season right there.
I could second that. I'm gonna give a little bit of props to Pierre Gasly.
There you go.
Yeah, a little bit of props to Pierre Gasly for his performance in Spain, keeping it ahead of Esteban, making it happen. I'm gonna go right into my props for Austria.
Go for it.
I just want a standing round of applause for Haas.
Oh, man.
Their best results of the season, a 6th and 8th. Both drivers, a great performance for the weekend. They, like I just said with Ricardo, they got a little gifted with the action up front. But regardless, they would have both been in the points. So for them, I think is a huge success. And they definitely made use of the change of the sprint format this weekend, because the sprint race themselves didn't go well for them, but they made some changes going into qualifying for the race, and they made it work. So
yeah,
good on them. There was a little bit of a hairy moment around lap 12 when they were battling each other. We saw K-Mag drop F-bomb on the radio
Yeah, that was
when they asked him to kind of chill out a little bit, and it's Kev putting in that fight and still bringing it home and making it work. So
yeah. I think when the season's all said and done, we might have to prop Haas as a whole for the entire season. Before I give mine, while we're talking about radio talk, did you see the fine that Yuki Tsunoda got for using the R word on the
I didn't
radio?
realize that's what he said.
I
But
believe so. I mean, they didn't put it in the FIA
oh
document, but I did
man,
a little bit of internet sleuthing and found out that that was what he said. And some people thought that that was a pretty harsh fine. I mean, if we were fining everybody for that, I'd be in debt. I'd be bankrupt right now. So
yeah,
relax.
20,000 euros a pop.
Yeah, relax. I'd be $1 billion in debt. My prop is going to go to, and this might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but my prop is going to go to Lando Norris. I know
Okay.
he DNF'd in this race, but he has. I feel like this race is a stamp that he is here and he is going to fight for the drivers' championship. There might be a pretty big gap. This race extended that gap, but he has solidified himself, especially in that moment where they came together, where he said, "I'm not fucking moving. You're gonna have to hit me if you want." If you want to get me off the track, you're going to have to push me off the track. I'm not going anywhere, because that was his race to win had that not happened. And though it didn't go his way, though he didn't even score a single point, he might have fucked his car up in that collision. I think the metaphorical points that he gained is why he's getting my prop. And my flop is going to go to Williams. Just absolutely turned their season around in the opposite direction. They don't even look like they have the pace that they used to, where it used to be like, oh, Williams at least has that straight line speed. They just look like Williams a la 2020. Let's just absolutely dog shit. So I'm gonna go with them, and then I'm gonna give an honorable mention to Alpine. Just good, fun, vitriolic racing, and I like that.
All right, I got two general questions before we go. First one, now that Austria is over, there's been word that Alpine has been in talks with Carlos Sainz about potentially signing him moving forward.
I mentioned that earlier.
There's rumors that, and coupled with that, there's rumors that like Alpine may drop the whole Renault factory thing, may do some kind of like Mercedes engine powertrain deal, which might be an enticing thing for Carlos. At this point in the season, looking at his remaining options, like what do you feel like is his best option moving forward? He apparently got offered a deal from Mercedes, but he did not take it because it was only a 1-year deal.
With that offer coming off the table, which I think he should have taken, if that offer was there, I think he should have taken that one. But if it's completely gone, then I think Alpine is his best choice. Go back and join the Renault family. He's already spent 2 years there. He's going to be familiar with the factory. He's going to be familiar with the faces. The car is obviously different. The teammate is very different. I don't know if they spent any time in the Red Bull Academy actually driving together, but he's actually probably got to be pretty well acquainted with Pierre, and they're going to be a better duo than him and Esteban. So I think that's his best move right now.
Yeah, I mean,
or the dark horse Haas.
I mean, they've been showing pretty great results as of late, and
yeah, bring Carlos to the States. Actually,
I mean, give him if they offered him a nice 2-3 year deal, I'm sure he would take it.
Yeah, interesting.
Last question. I was thinking about this a little bit. I haven't really heard anybody talk about this per se, so I'm not really sure. But here's your thoughts on it. Like, are we now seeing the effects of the penalty that Red Bull got for their budget cap overspend? Like they got a reduction in like tunnel testing last year, and so that obviously has effects on development. So I was like thinking, I'm like, was that did that have any effect on Red Bull, and is that why the teams were able to somewhat catch up to them? Like,
that's a great
has
question.
that had any effect? And if so, like, does that mean the penalty worked, or if it doesn't have any effect, does it mean the penalty didn't work?
That's a great question. I think that's been an afterthought for people. I completely forgot about that and its effect that it could be having on Red Bull. I mean, if you can point to anything, you might as well point to that. I know they've lost some personnel, but maybe not where it counts the most. But maybe, that hit to their wallet is where it really counts the most. I'm sure whether or not that's the reason, I'm sure the FIA would like to take credit for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just haven't really heard much talk about it, so I'm sure it's like just if it whatever percentage it is, it's probably very small,
Mhm.
and it's just a bunch of different things stacking up and compounding to be able to allow those teams to close the gap. But and I don't know, it's just something I was thinking about. So
Yeah, very interesting. I don't
just
know. I like that. I got one question I got one question for you before we leave.
yeah.
Who's going to win the British Grand Prix?
Oh man, I think Lando Norris is going to win.
That is the right answer. Lando Norris is going to win the British Grand Prix. This has been Barely Qualified, a Formula One podcast, the post-Spanish Grand Prix and the post-Austrian Grand Prix edition. We'll see you guys next week for the post-British Grand Prix. Peace.
Peace.
Qualified.